Buongiorno a tutti, è un grande piacere di essere qui con loro e di avere questa opportunità di partecipare in questo congresso. Il mio italiano non è, come si dice, è un poco mezzo mezzo, e quindi è meglio che parlo in inglese, con permesso, grazie. Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to be with you today and to have a conversation with you about the role of the chairs, the Scholas Chairs, as a resource for learning and the transformation of reality. And in the short period of time that we have, I just want to share a few of my thoughts with you. As we have heard, the Scholas philosophy focuses on instilling in our young people the habits, the attitudes, the beliefs, the values, dispositions that allow them to navigate a multicultural and diverse society where we maximize potentials as individuals and use our capacities to improve reality, namely our society and all the peoples within it. Scholas, as we have heard, seeks to transform traditional school formats and structures to incorporate pedagogies of encounter, of integration, and reality that embrace a new vision of education, an education that fosters social integration and intercultural encounters through work for peace, respect for diversity, cooperation, responsible participation, honesty, and environmental awareness. However, as is suggested in the various writings about Scholas, young people do not develop these attributes automatically. These values and behaviors must intentionally be taught. And our schools in particular play a vitally important role in providing rich educational experiences for students to build and develop their individual capacities for success in the way that is envisioned by Scholas. And I would like to offer a few comments as to why I believe Scholas has the potential to achieve its transformational goals, and to examine a few of the particular issues we should consider as we work to implement Scholas into our schools. Now, indeed, research studies have found that to achieve the kind of young people who possess these positive character values and traits, it is not enough to have curriculum in the classrooms that teach students universal values such as respect, honesty, responsibility, cooperation. Research has suggested that these curricula are not very effective in our schools. I was privileged to co-chair the International Consortium for Research on Values Education. It was a global initiative looking at different forms of curricula that teach students' values in our schools, in primary and secondary schools in particular. And a review of such values education curriculum were found not to be very effective for a number of reasons. First of all, they were found to be too separate from what is normally taught within the core academic curriculum, that these were being marginalized curricula that were often viewed as less important by the teachers and therefore not taken very seriously. Secondly, many of the existing values education curricula that take a very superficial approach to teaching complex and nuanced values, often through a prescribed set of prefabricated teaching activities and units that work through values independently. Responsibility is taught on Tuesday, honesty is taught on Thursday, without regard to the relationship and interaction among different values, nor to the cultural or developmental complexities that undergird each of these values. And thirdly, the curricula were found to often model teacher-centered approaches where the teachers instruct students about these important values through readings, classroom assignments, and discussions. Students were found to be given few opportunities to practice the values and develop their own personal meaning and capacities. So what did we find as the strategies that work? Scholas, I think, has great potential to succeed because its educational philosophy, I believe, includes the kinds of educational practices that have been found to be essential for the kinds of values and behavioral transformation programs need to succeed. And embedded in the philosophy of Scholas are the principles and pedagogies for active student engagement, that are aligned with the kinds of teaching and the learning practices that are found to be most effective. And the importance of building Scholas on pedagogies of encounter, of integration, of reality cannot be overstated. These pedagogies are, in essence, the aspects of Scholas that will help students gain in the skills and develop the values that Scholas espouses. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, gathered a group of university researchers and other educational experts several years ago and did an analysis of educational practices where students learn best and achieve intended academic, personal, social, and emotional goals. So when these educational practices are in place, students achieve in these various areas more effectively across different kinds of experiences. And we have heard these before, but the real issue here is that we now have evidence to show that these are the practices that indeed make a difference. Students learn best when their boundaries are expanded, when they are asked to move outside of their comfort zone, when they're asked to experience new things, to encounter new things that are different from what they normally encounter. That education is more effective when it taps students' personal interests. The more that students are interested in what is being taught, the more that they will invest in that experience. Personalizing these experiences becomes essential and important. The evidence points to that. The evidence also points that when young people are empowered to take control of their education, to feel that they have the capacity, the knowledge, the skills to learn and to make a difference, that they can achieve the goals that we set out in our educational programs. When the instruction is constructivist, where it's not the teacher giving the students, as Professor mentioned earlier, giving the students the knowledge, but students constructing their knowledges through different kinds of experiences, through trial and error and experimentation. Those are the kinds of pedagogies where students succeed better. When learning is collaborative, where there's a social aspect of learning where students are engaged in groups and other collaborations that test their knowledge, their experience, and allow them to share their knowledge and experience with others. When the learning is active, when they're actively engaged, and perhaps one of the most important things, when learning is authentic, where students are learning about real things that matter, not just assignments for the professor or the school, but learning about things that matter, that have real consequences for others. These are very important things that research has found are essential for student learning, and thus the promise of Scholas lies not only in the values it strives to develop in students, but also in its approach and how to engage students in their development. As Scholas works with schools, the more that we can involve teachers in embedding these instructional strategies, the more success we can achieve. The more that students have the opportunity to confront the complexities of values through real-life experiences, the more they are to develop the habits of the head, heart, and hands that allow them to move from thinking about the values to being the values, or becoming the values, as the professor said, where they move from thinking about what honesty is to being honest, where they think about moving from what cooperation means to being cooperative. Authentic experiences rooted in reality is a key ingredient to making such programs successful. And research studies have found that the more that these authentic reality-based experiences are integrated with students' educational curriculum, with the academic curriculum, the more students achieve the intended outcomes and the more successful and sustainable the programs are. One of the most promising practices for advancing the kinds of values and habits that Scholas seeks to accomplish is through the practice of service learning. And service learning is called by many names across the globe. It appears in many different ways. Professor Fossati shared some of the service learning initiatives at his university. It's an experiential learning practice that is rooted in academic content and school-based learning through which students apply that knowledge to address important, real societal issues through active, direct engagement with communities. It is a pedagogy that now has been adopted in many countries at all levels of education. In the United States, 1/3 of all of our primary and secondary schools are engaged in service learning. The university level, it's about 50% of our students do some kind of service learning. We see service learning growing in many parts of the world, in Asia, in Australia, in Africa. South Africa has a robust service learning initiative, and throughout Latin America and Central America. In some countries like Argentina, for example, service learning is a requirement for high school. And having observed, I would say, service learning in more than 24 countries, I would say some of the most robust, most well-developed service learning is in Latin America, in places like Argentina, and Professor Nieves Tapia, who's here, has really championed and been a leader in that regard. And even in Europe, we see service learning, in Germany, in England, and Ireland, Croatia, and even here in Italy. In fact, in a couple of weeks, I go to Bologna for a service learning conference here in Italy. So why service learning? The findings from research on the impact of this practice are the focus on the kinds of values, behaviors, dispositions that Scholas seeks to advance. Service learning also contains these instructional practices which are all aligned, I think, with what Scholas is seeking to accomplish. The OECD study that I mentioned looked at several different pedagogies, project-based learning and problem-based learning and work-based learning, game-based learning. Service learning was the only pedagogy that had all 7 of these important pieces. And the one distinguishing feature of service learning was the authentic learning piece. The fact that students were not just doing problems and doing problem-based learning, but they were doing problem-based learning in real situations in the communities where the solutions that they developed had real consequences for real people. And that authenticity makes a difference in how students invest themselves in their initiatives and the values that they ultimately derive from those experiences. And the Scholas pedagogy of encounter is exactly what these kinds of experiences can offer, and service learning, I think, can be a wonderful vehicle to doing that. I think that reaching out to schools that embrace service learning, one thing that Scholas may want to think about is that because we have now this robust programs across the globe that do use service learning, Scholas may want to connect with some of those programs. Because in those schools, these teachers have already embraced these pedagogies. They've already see these pedagogies as being valuable and important. And one of the things we learned from our studies of these value education programs is that unless the teachers participate, unless they buy into these pedagogies and these systems, these programs will go away. These programs will remain marginalized. So it is very essential that we think about how to support the teachers in this work. I want to just talk very briefly about one of the studies that we did when I was at UC Berkeley in California. And this is another role that universities have in this work, in that we can provide evidence and support for some of these claims we're making about the importance of all these values and all this work in our schools. And the study that we did was ironically called Project Heart, Head, Hands. This was a number of years ago now, and it was a values education program for primary and primary school students that organized around these traits: caring, honesty, responsibility, integrity, respect for others, citizenship, planning and decision-making, and problem-solving. These are very much the kinds of things that Scholas espouses. This program was about changing the way values education is taught in schools. Typically, it's put your math books away. Now we're going to do values education. Today's word is responsibility. Can anyone spell responsibility? Can you tell me when you've been responsible? Very good. Now now take out your science books. Right? This is how a lot of these values education curriculum are taught. This particular curriculum sought to do a number of things, to integrate it with curricular, with academic curricular, in particular language arts. This was required curriculum for the teachers, and the teachers connected these values that I just showed you with the language arts curriculum. They also built supplemental languages. The teachers worked together. We had over 100 schools participating in this. The teachers built a curriculum extracting from the different stories and the different language arts curriculum the values, those 8 values from these different stories, and developed activities where students could participate in learning more about these values. There was also social-emotional lessons where students were asked to share stories and connect the curriculum to their own personal lives. And there were service learning projects where students just didn't read about or talk about or discuss these issues, but they enacted them in community problem-solving activities in partnership with communities. So, a few things also. This was school-wide. Teachers received support throughout. They attended monthly meetings, and there was coaching that the teachers received. So one of the things that we tried to do was to assess what is the outcomes of these programs. And so we found some very interesting findings. I'm going to go through this very quickly in the interest of time. But one of the things we did was we gave some pre- and post-assessments from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And some very interesting findings came up. Our expectation was that as students, we looked at grades 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that would be age 8, 9, 10, and 11 of the students. We looked at all the students across these 100 schools. There were about 10,000 students in our study. What was interesting is we would expect that at the end of the year, the students would increase in their character asset development. That across those 8 characteristics, cooperation, responsibility, etc., that they would grow over the year. What did we find? We found actually that that was not the case. On the left-hand side, you see these 2 sets of graphs. On the left-hand side, you have graphs of the students who participated in this program, Project Heart, Hand, Hands. On the right-hand side, you see students that did not. The first column on the left, you have 4 columns. The first column is grade 3. The second column is grade 4, then grade 5, and then grade 6. Okay? Then you go to the other, on the right-hand side set, you have grade 3, 4, 5, and 6. Right? See? Then you have a black bar and a gray bar. The black bar is the pre-test. The gray bar is the post-test. What did we find? We found that there actually is a maturational effect. That students, young people, lose their character assets, their value assets over time. From beginning to the end of the year, responsibility, cooperation, honesty gets lower each year and with each grade. This is a problem. This is only to grade 6. Imagine secondary school, right? So one thing we did find, though, is that students, when they participated in this Project Heart, Head, Hands, had a lower, statistically significantly lower drop in their character assets. And the one thing that we found is that third bullet here, that the changes in character assets relative to curriculum vary classroom by classroom. And what mattered was dosage. Sorry, here we go. What matters was dosage. The more students did service learning, the more that they did authentic learning and practice these values, the higher their scores were at the end, meaning they dropped less at the end of the year. Right? We've replicated this study, and we found the same results, although not as strong as the first time. Okay? This is something to really keep in mind, that it's not just about teaching these values or having lessons about the values. The students need to practice them. The final point I want to make, the Scholas philosophy, as I understand it, is not about inserting a program into an existing system, but it's about changing the system. It's about educational and social transformation. The idea of moving from inclusion to integration, from involvement to encounter, are about transforming how we deliver the educational system. We have to be careful in implementing our programs, however. Programs, especially those that have strong value components. And it's not just about implementing them, as I've demonstrated. And so we have to be careful about these things if we really are serious about transformation. For example, in values education, we tend to include values such as fairness and equality. And we believe these are good things, positive things. But just like inclusion is never enough to have a positive impact on those who need it, this is from the Scholas paper, right? Inclusion is never enough to have a positive impact on those who need it. Neither is the notion of equality. Certainly we want to be fair, we want to treat people equally, but this is often not sufficient when dealing with challenging, complex societal issues such as poverty, health crisis, other societal challenges that are a result of entrenched systemic issues. We need to keep in mind that the ultimate goal is not to ensure everyone is treated equally or fairly. That's not the final goal, ultimate goal. Rather, the ultimate goal is to ensure that everyone thrives and can achieve to his or her fullest potential. It is why Scholas suggests we need to move from a pedagogy of inclusion, which is never enough to make a positive impact, to a pedagogy of integration, which emphasizes interaction and mutual understanding. It is why we need to move from a pedagogy of involvement to a pedagogy of encounter. And it is why we need to move from a focus on equality to a focus on equity. And I leave you with this final slide here. Equity that is focused not on equality and fairness, but on the ultimate outcome of ensuring that all have an opportunity to succeed and to thrive, to achieve their fullest potential. It is one thing to be fair and equal, but that is not enough to really transform our societies. This is about moving to a philosophy of equity. And this is what programs like service learning and I think like Scholars can do, in universities can very much be a partner with that. So by working with schools and directly with the teachers, by securing authentic experiences in which students can engage in reality-based experiences through service learning, and by working with existing service learning programs and the various service learning that exists across the globe, Scholas can achieve its goals in securing full embeddedness in the school systems and achieve its goals to transform education for the betterment of our students and society. Grazie.